Montana Territory, November 1879. The first snow had fallen the night before, thin and dry, blowing like sifted flour over the hills when Archer Ashford rode his bay gelding into the back end of Winslow. He was not looking for anything but supplies and maybe a warm meal. What he found instead was a girl curled up in a rusted wheelbarrow behind the blacksmith shop, arms wrapped around herself, lips blue and trembling. He stopped the horse. She was not a child, he could tell that at once. Her dress was thin, patched at the knees and sleeves, and her boots were worn flat. Her hair was a tangled curtain of dark gold, half frozen where it clung to the collar of her coat. She stirred when he stepped down from the saddle, one hand lifting, as if ready to fight him off with nothing but frostbit fingers. "You trying to freeze to death?" Archer asked, voice low, and even her eyes blinked open. Green, pale as the sagebrush behind her, she did not answer. He crouched beside the wheelbarrow, looking her over. She was maybe 19, maybe 20, too thin. Face dirty, cheekbones split with an old cut. She looked like someone who had been running for a long time with nowhere to go. "You got a name?" She hesitated, then nodded once. Eleanor what?" "Eleanor Pierce." "All right," he said. "I'm Archer Ashford. Let's get you out of this thing." She flinched when he reached for her. "I am not going to hurt you," he said. "But you are going to die out here if you stay like this." "I do not got anywhere else to go." "You do now." He saw her eyes flicker, unsure. "You'll sleep in a bed from now on," he said, slow and sure. "Not out here, not like this." She did not cry, not even then. But something in her face cracked like a frozen pond starting to thaw. He lifted her gently, careful of her stiff limbs. She weighed hardly more than a sack of oats. He wrapped her in his coat, set her in the saddle, then climbed up behind her to steady her as they rode out of town. His homestead sat 5 miles south, tucked into a low valley where the wind cut softer and the pines grew thick. It was not much one main cabin, a barn, a lean-to, but it was warm and it was dry. He helped her down, walked her inside, and set her by the fire. She stared at the hearth like she had forgotten what fire looked like. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded. He handed her a tin plate of beans and cornbread, and she ate it slow, like she was not sure she could keep it down. He watched her from the table, quiet. She had not said much, but he could feel the way her eyes kept flicking to the door, like she expected someone to come crashing through it. Or maybe she was just used to running. "You got family?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not anymore." He waited. "I had 2 little brothers," she said finally. "Aaron and Amos. We were in Kansas. After Ma died and Pa drank himself to death, I tried to keep them alive. Did what I could, but I could not feed them both. They got taken by a traveling preacher couple, said they would raise them up proper. I never saw them again." Archer nodded, quiet. "I tried to follow them west," she added, voice hitching. "But they were gone too fast. I ran out of money in Miles City, been sleeping wherever I could since." He stood and walked to the back room. When he came back, he laid a folded quilt in her lap. "That bed in there is yours now," he said. "You take it. No one will bother you here." She looked up at him, a long beat passing between them. Her eyes were still guarded, but something in them softened. "I do not have anything to give you," she said. "I am not asking for anything," he said. "Sleep. That is all." She rose slow, legs shaky, and disappeared into the back room. He heard the bed creak a few moments later, then silence. The days that followed moved quiet and steady. Eleanor slept for nearly 2 days. When she finally came out, she helped wash dishes without being asked. She swept the floor, fed the chickens. She did not talk much, but she listened. Archer found himself telling her things he had not spoken in years about his brother who died in the war, about the years he spent driving cattle before settling here. One morning she stood on the porch with her arms crossed and said, "You built this place all by yourself, every board." She nodded, impressed. "You want to learn how to split fence rail?" he asked. "I want to learn everything." She did. She learned fast. How to tend a garden, how to patch the roof, how to check the stock's hooves. She asked questions. She laughed sometimes, soft and sudden, like it surprised her. Archer noticed everything: the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, how she hummed under her breath when she was working with flour. One evening, he found her braiding a length of twine into a bracelet, sitting on the porch steps as the sun dropped behind the hills. "You miss them?" he asked. She nodded. "Every day." "I know what that is like." She looked at him then, long and searching. He sat down beside her. "You are safe here, Eleanor." "I know," she said. They sat in silence after that, but it was not empty. It was full of understanding, something shared. That night, as he passed her room, he saw her door open. She stood there in the glow of the fire, arms wrapped across her chest. "Thank you," she said. He stepped closer. "For what?" "For being kind, for not asking anything of me. For letting me be here." He reached out slow, offering, and touched her hand. Her fingers curled around his like they had been waiting to. "You are not just here," he said. "You belong here now." She looked at him with those sage-colored eyes, and for the first time he saw something else there. Hope. It was the beginning. Neither of them said it, but they both felt it, and when he let her hand go, she held on a second longer than she needed to. They were two people who had lost more than they had kept. But now, out here in the quiet hills of Montana, something new was growing. Something steady, something real. And as she closed her door behind her, Archer stood in the silence of the hall and felt a warmth he had not known in years. Eleanor Pierce was not sleeping in a wheelbarrow anymore. She was home. The thaw came late that year, slow and stubborn, the sun rising earlier each morning but still casting long blue shadows across the snow-crusted fields. By mid-March, the earth softened enough for the fence posts to hold, and the creek behind the barn began to run again, crisp and clear and loud. Eleanor stood at the edge of it one morning, a woven basket looped over one arm, her boots sinking just slightly into the damp ground. She watched the water move, fast and clean, and felt something stir inside her, a quiet current she hadn't known was there. Behind her, Archer's voice came low but near. "You've got the look of someone listening to something no one else can hear." "I was trying to remember the sound of it," she said. "Before this, I hadn't heard a running creek since I was a girl." He stepped beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "It's different when it's your land." She looked up at him. "Does it ever feel like it's yours, really? Some mornings more than others." She smiled faintly and turned back to the water. "I was thinking I might try to plant something, not just for eating, something pretty." He nodded. "There's wild flax if you go higher up the ridge, blue as anything. You could dig some up, replant it near the front stoop." "I'd like that." They stood quietly for another few breaths before she asked, "Did you ever think about leaving this place?" He tilted his head toward the trees lining the far ridge. "Used to, thought about Wyoming once, or the Bitterroots. But I stayed. Guess I figured I'd already buried too much here to start over somewhere else." Eleanor looked at him carefully, then bent to pick up a smooth, flat stone, rubbing it between her palms. "You ever buried someone, too?" he said. "My brother and a man I rode with in Texas. Both under cottonwoods, but only one with a marker." "I'd want a marker," she said. "Even if it was just a stone someone carved my name into with a nail." "You won't need one for a long time," she nodded, and the stone disappeared into her pocket. Later that evening, they sat outside the barn beneath the lean-to oil lamp glowing between them. Eleanor had brought out a shirt of Archer's with a torn sleeve and was stitching it back together with steady fingers. He was shaping a new hoe handle from a piece of ash wood, knife moving slow and sure. "You work like someone who's always fixing something," she said. "Everything worth having needs mending sooner or later." She glanced down at the shirt. "Even people, especially people." She didn't answer, but her sewing slowed. After a while she asked, "Do you ever miss company?" "You mean town?" "I mean people, more than just one." "I used to, thought maybe I'd run cattle again, hire on some hands. But I guess I figured quiet was better than the wrong kind of noise." "What if it's not wrong?" He set the knife down, looked at her in the lamplight. "Then I'd keep it." Her hands stilled. "I'm not just passing through," she said. "I know. I'm not sure what I'm becoming out here. Whatever it is, it's honest." She folded the shirt and laid it across her lap, then looked up at him. "You ever think about what it'd be like to share more than just work with someone?" His breath caught slightly, but he didn't look away. "I do. Me too." The air between them felt warmer than the lamp could make it. She reached over slowly and touched his arm, just once, just enough. They didn't speak again that night, not out loud. But when she rose to go inside, he stood with her, walked her to the door, and waited until she was safely in before turning back toward the barn. The next morning, she found him in the field, already working. She joined him without a word, carried the post-hole digger, measured the spacing between rails. He handed her the hammer, let her drive in the nails. They worked side by side like they were building something that would last. Neither of them said it, but both of them knew. The fence wasn't the only thing rising from the ground. By early April, the wind had changed its voice, no longer sharp and hollow, but heavy with thaw and the scent of damp earth. The soil, dark and rich from resting all winter, gave easily beneath Archer's boots as he turned it over with the spade. Eleanor was nearby, kneeling in the garden bed she'd cleared of stone, pressing seeds into the dirt with careful fingers. "You ever grow tobacco?" she asked, brushing a smudge of dirt across her cheek. "No, never took to it. My mother used to let it dry in the windows when I was small. Said it kept the moths out, I just liked the smell." Archer leaned on the spade handle, watching her. "You miss her, when I remember her. It's getting harder, her voice especially. I try to keep it in mind, but it slips." He nodded, not offering comfort, just standing in it with her. She sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on her skirt. "You ever think about what kind of man you'd be if things had gone different?" "I don't think I'd recognize myself." "I might have married a harness maker," she said. "There was this boy, 2 farms over, always had ink on his fingers. He asked my father once, but Pa said no, called him soft. I wonder what kind of life I'd have had if that had happened." Archer didn't look away. "Better? No, just different. I wouldn't have learned how to shoot a fox stealing hens, or how to sleep light with one ear open, or how to keep a man from cheating me out of a penny I didn't have. You learned all of that on your own." "No, some of it came hard, some of it from women I met along the way. One of them showed me how to hide a blade in my boot. Another taught me how to read a man's eyes before his mouth starts lying." She stood, brushing off her skirt. "But I've never seen eyes like yours." He didn't answer, but the air between them shifted, quiet and sure. That evening, when the lantern was lit and the shutters pulled tight against the dusk, Eleanor stood at the hearth stirring supper while Archer repaired a loose buckle on the mule's harness at the table. "You think about marrying again?" she asked, not looking back. "I never married," she turned then. "You're near 35, never once, no, came close once. She left while I was still breaking horses down near Abilene, said I was too quiet by half." Eleanor returned to the pot, stirring slower. She was wrong about that. When they sat down to eat, the silence between them wasn't strained. It had the shape of something settled. Archer passed her the skillet bread, and she didn't hesitate to tear off a piece and dip it in her stew. "You ever get tired of being the only one carrying a rifle?" she asked between bites. "You want to learn," she nodded. "I want to know how to keep coyotes from the chickens, and I want to know how to keep myself." They went out the next morning before the sun had cleared the ridge. The rifle was long for her arms, but she shouldered it with care. He showed her how to brace her feet in the mud, how to breathe through the trigger. "I don't want to shoot anything unless I have to," she said. "You won't have to unless we're unlucky." She took her first shot and missed, but not wide. He didn't speak. She adjusted her grip, tried again, and the second shot split the knot in the fence post. When she lowered the rifle, he said, "You ever handled one before?" "Once. A man tried to pull me off a wagon outside Fort Keogh. I took his pistol and fired it into the ground to make him let go. Never touched one again till now." "You did right." She looked at him, rifle still in her hands. "I'm tired of surviving. I want to be someone who lives." "You already are." That night, she brought her quilt from the back room and sat with him by the fire. She didn't ask permission, and he didn't offer it. She laid it across their laps, the ends tucked around their knees, and when he reached for her hand this time, she laced her fingers with his without hesitation. "You reckon I could stay through summer?" she asked. "I reckon you could stay through all of it if that's what you want." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "It is." They didn't speak again, not even as the fire burned low. They sat there until the room cooled and the stars outside thickened, and when he rose, he didn't leave her behind. He held out his hand and she took it, following him into the dark with no fear left beneath her ribs. She had stopped running. And he had started hoping, and neither of them meant to let go. Late spring brought the kind of warmth that settled into the bones. The wind no longer howled through the pines but bent them gently, whispering instead of warning. The creek ran full and constant, and the garden behind the cabin had begun to green in uneven rows. Archer had fashioned a gate from scrap cedar, and Eleanor had tied a length of ribbon to one slat in the corner, just because it pleased her. She was standing at the wash basin, sleeves rolled and apron damp, when Archer came in carrying a wrapped parcel wrapped in brown paper and twine. He placed it on the table without a word. "What's that?" she asked, wiping her hands on a linen cloth. "Something from a trader that passed through, said he took it in trade from a woman in Helena, didn't want it anymore." She stepped closer, cautious. "You bought something for me? I figured you might need it come Sunday." Eleanor loosened the twine, folded back the wrapping, her fingers stilled. "It's a hymn book," she said, voice hushed. "Figured you'd know the songs. My mother had one, not this nice." Archer turned slightly unsure. "Didn't mean to overstep." "You didn't." She traced the gold-pressed lettering on the cover. "Do you go to the chapel in Winslow?" "I used to, before the preacher left." She opened the book slowly. "I wouldn't mind going, just once." He nodded. "Then we will." They stood in the quiet a moment longer before Eleanor closed the book and laid it flat. "It's strange how something so small can pull things out of you. I hadn't thought of her voice in months, but now I can hear it plain." Archer looked at her carefully. "You want to sing again?" "Not in front of anyone, but maybe here while I work. You should." Later that afternoon, Eleanor sat in the grass beyond the paddock, a basket beside her and a half-mended stocking in her lap. Archer was repairing a section of the barn roof, hammer echoing in the soft air. She looked up once, squinting into the light, then lowered her gaze back to her stitching. "How old were you when you came west?" she asked as he climbed down the ladder. 21. "Did you come alone?" "I followed my brother. He wanted land, I wanted distance." She didn't press. Instead, she pulled a folded paper from the basket and held it out. "I found this in the back of the cupboard. Was it yours?" He took it, smoothed it open with 2 fingers. "That's my mother's handwriting. You want me to tuck it away again?" "No," he said. "Keep it with your hymn book. She'd have liked that." Evening brought a hush to the valley, the sun stretching long across the fields. Eleanor stood at the stove, stirring something in the iron pot, while Archer tightened the hinges on the doorframe that had begun to sag with the season's damp. "You ever think about building on?" she asked. "You mean another room, maybe, if someone ever came visiting. Or if we needed space for something." He looked up from the hinge. "You thinking of someone? I don't know yet, but I think it might be nice to have a place ready just in case." He set the screwdriver down and stepped to the doorway. "You thinking about staying?" She didn't turn. "I already am." He stepped inside. "Then we'll build whatever you want." They ate by lamplight, the windows open just enough to let the night air in. Afterward, Archer reached into the cupboard and pulled out the old deck of playing cards, the ones with faded corners and a tobacco stain across the 4 of clubs. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You play fair." "I play quiet." She dealt the first hand. Halfway through the second, she set her cards down and said, "I never had a space that felt like mine before this." He didn't answer with words. He laid his hand down, reached across the table, and brushed his thumb across the back of hers. She didn't flinch, just met his eyes steady. "I don't want to leave this," she said. "You won't." They sat that way, hands resting together until the lamp burned low. Then she rose and reached for the door to the back room. But this time, she didn't walk through it alone. She turned, and in the hush between heartbeats, she said, "Come with me." It wasn't invitation. It was belonging. He followed, and the door closed behind them, not with finality, but with something beginning. Outside, the wind moved through the grass like breath. The ribbon on the garden gate fluttered once, then stilled. By late May, the trees along the ridge had leafed out full and green, and the hills beyond the cabin had softened under a blanket of new grass. The mule's winter coat had shed in thick clumps, and Eleanor had taken to brushing it out each morning with a curry comb, sleeves pushed to her elbows, hair tied back with a strip of muslin Archer had found in the bottom of an old chest. They'd settled into a rhythm more felt than spoken, one that stitched its way into the hours like thread through calico. She'd begun keeping a small ledger in the cupboard drawer, tracking supplies, planting times, and the names of things that grew wild in the valley. Archer had pointed out the native chokecherry shrubs near the ravine slope, and she'd boiled the fruit down into a thick jam, surprised by how bitter could turn good with patience and sugar. One afternoon, she stood by the barn with a length of rope coiled at her hip, watching a storm build low on the horizon. The clouds were heavy, layered like slate, and the scent of iron and dust hung in the air. "You think it'll pass us?" she asked as Archer stepped out from the lean-to, wiping his hands on his trousers. "No," he said, "but it won't last long." She glanced toward the field, where a few fence rails still waited to be set. "We've got time to finish that row." He nodded, and they worked quickly, the wind teasing at their clothes, the light around them dimming. She held the posts steady as he drove them in, his movements sure and practiced. When the first drops began to fall, he rested the mallet against his knee and looked at her. "You afraid of thunder?" "No," she said, brushing her damp hair back. "But I used to be." The rain came harder as they jogged back to the cabin, laughing breathlessly as they ducked under the porch roof. She turned to him just as he reached the door, her cheeks flushed, strands of hair clinging to her neck. "I never used to like the rain," she said. He watched her for a moment. "And now it feels like something that belongs to us." Inside, she peeled off her wet overskirt and hung it near the hearth. Archer added another log to the fire, the scent of smoke curling into the warm air. She moved into the kitchen, pulled down 2 tin cups, and poured the last of the coffee they'd brewed that morning. "You ever think about what kind of life you'd have had if your brother hadn't come west?" she asked, handing him a cup. He sat taking it from her. "I'd have stayed in Missouri. Maybe taken over my father's tannery, married someone local, had children, but I don't think I'd have known what it meant to be content." "You think you are now?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for her hand across the table, his fingers wrapping around hers. "Not just content. Settled in the truest sense." She touched the edge of her cup, voice quieter now. "I've been thinking about the land, if it's yours by deed or by how much of yourself you give to it." "It's both," he said. "But mostly the second. I want to give something to it too. You already have." They sat that way a long while, the rain softening to a hush against the windows. Later, when the storm had passed and the sky went pale with evening light, Eleanor stepped outside barefoot, the earth cool and wet beneath her soles. Archer followed, and she turned to him with a look that held no hesitation. "I want to marry you," she said simply, "not for shelter or company, but because I want this to be my life, with you." He didn't speak at first. He simply reached for her hands, held them between his. "I've already built this place for 2, he said. "I just didn't know it until you came." They were married that June in the clearing behind the barn, beneath a cottonwood that had stood longer than either of them had been alive. It was a small ceremony, only the preacher from Winslow, his wife, and a neighbor couple who brought a pie and hand-sewn linens as gifts. Eleanor wore a dress she dyed herself, pale blue from crushed berries, and Archer shaved clean for the first time in years. When the vows were spoken and the preacher's voice fell away, Archer took her hands again, the same way he had on the porch weeks before. "You brought color back to this place," he said, "and to me." She touched his cheek. "You made room for me before I knew how to ask for it." They stayed in the clearing long after the others had left, sitting with their backs to the tree, her head resting on his shoulder. No more words were needed. That summer, Eleanor planted asters near the front stoop, and Archer built a smokehouse from river stone. She sang now while she worked, not hymns, but tunes she made up as she went. He took to reading aloud in the evenings, his voice low and steady as she sewed beside the fire. By autumn, they'd added a small room to the side of the cabin, just as she'd hoped. Not for visitors and not out of need, but for the future. And when the snow came again, soft and early, it found them inside by the hearth, sharing a quilt, her head tucked beneath his chin. The wind could come if it wanted. The cold could stay as long as it pleased. They had built something that held, something that kept, and it would not break.